Welcome back and welcome to another installment of Paper 2 Resources. If you joined me for that first one, I definitely hope it was helpful when it comes to developing a little bit of food for thought. We certainly hammered out the who, what, when, where, and how as far as Sam Patch is concerned. So I do think that today's installment's going to be even more effective, not only with providing you a very important part of the reading, breaking down that reading, but also connecting this reading, Sam Patch, with what we've been talking about thus far in class, both lecture as well as readings. So, if you've been joining me through lecture, you know that I've made a big deal of talking about this system of free market enterprise, what might loosely be called capitalism. And I told you, and I've been telling you, that the early decades of the 19th century has really, seen the development of the capitalist system in the United States. Markets are developing, and this is creating opportunities, but it's also creating new questions, and maybe a better way of putting that, unforeseen questions. Like, how much power should bosses have? These people that own the factories, the means of production, should they just have no limit whatsoever to their power? What representation, what role would workers play in the decision-making processes, if any at all, inside those factories? So as we go through this, I want you to ask yourself if the scenario that I'm going to describe to you in Sam Patch, does it remind you of anything that we've read about, that we've talked about, an individual that I've introduced you to? Because you've all written paper one at this point in the semester, and so you know what I look for is not just a report on, in this case, Sam Patch, but are you bringing background information in? Can you bring background information in? I think if you think about that question, you put it in the back of your mind, have I heard this before? Have I seen this before? I think that that's going to go a long way as far as writing an effective paper. So everybody ready? Today, what we're going to have as more or less a theme is, the decision-making power at the point of production. How much should employers have, and should workers have any at all? And the example that I'm going to give to you is ultimately going to kind of sound a little bit trivial, the lunch hour, but we're going to push that envelope, and I'm going to try to relate it to your own personal life, and I hope that that helps you break things down. But for the time being, if you're following along with me in a paper book, you're going to want to open that thing up to chapter 2, entitled Patterson. If you're with us online, scroll down to page 66. Open up or scroll down to page 66. One way or another, page 66 is where we're going to start. I'm down toward the bottom of page 66, and the example that we're going to point to here involves a collection of wealthy businessmen that own the factories, and they're getting ready to make a decision, okay? I'm setting the stage for you, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the ramifications of this decision here in just a bit. But it's a paragraph toward the bottom of page 66 that starts out, though most of Patterson. You see where I'm talking about? Though most of Patterson witnessed Sam's leap on the 4th of July, it is doubtful that the town's merchants and manufacturers were among them, for Sam had scheduled his leap at an hour at which they almost certainly were still at the banquet, offering toasts to progress, patriotism, and each other. A news story about this sleep was the first to report the phrase that became Sam's motto, "Some things can be done as well as others." So what Sam Patch just did is he let everybody that was willing to listen know he's going to be performing one of his crazy jumps. I think it goes without saying that people are going to be drawn to that. They want to see him do this crazy stunt. Ask yourself, why is he calling it? And more importantly, why is it so important when he's calling it? Ask yourself that. For right now, let's read that last line on page 66, the very last line on 66. 12 days later, that's where I am. 12 days later, Sam Patch announced that he would perform his astonishing leap once more, Monday, July 28th. On the same day as Sam's announcement, Wednesday, July 16th, 22 Patterson manufacturers made an announcement of their own. Notice, The subscribers hereby give notice to their workers and others that after Saturday, the 19th of July, 1828, they will stop their mills and factories at 7:30 in the morning for breakfast and at 1 p.m. for dinner. He means lunch. This arrangement, we consider, will divide the day in a more equal manner than heretofore and prove of advantage to the workers. What just happened? Well, if you're paying attention, what just happened is they altered the lunch hour. It used to be noon, 12 o'clock. They're going to push it back to 1. I want you to ask yourself something. For those of you that are taking classes, as in lecture classes, did you schedule that class for any specific reason? Did it fit your schedule? More importantly, what would happen if your instructor said, instead of meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, we're going to push that back to 11:30? How would you take that, especially if that instructor didn't run that by the class and say, hey, we're kind of considering this. Would this be okay? They just arrogantly came into the classroom one morning and said, this is the way it's going to be. I don't know about you, but it would probably rub me a little bit the wrong way. I would bet that you're probably pretty similar. But for the time being, let's continue this conversation. I'm in the middle of page 67, and it's a paragraph that starts out, the announcement changed. The announcement changed the dinner hour from noon to 1 o'clock, and it met with resistance. A friendly newspaper stated that the owners had the good of the children in view, though the same editor had averred that they changed the lunch hour for their own convenience. It didn't. It really made no difference. The manufacturer's decree was certain to start a fight. And so, further down on that page, we learn about what Sam Patch and his cohort, his fellow workers, are doing about it. Right there in the middle of that page, in the mills, that paragraph starts out, in the mills, Sam Patch and the skilled Englishmen who were his peers read the proclamation and thought about it. It was only a small change in the routine of the working day, but a little reflection revealed what the bosses were trying to do. Signers of the decree owned all but 2 of the town's cotton mills and many of the foundries and factories. The new rule changed the lunch hour for nearly half of Patterson's manufacturing wage earners and for more than half of the job-holding children. In a mill town where most families depended on more than one breadwinner and where workers went home for lunch, few wage earners would be unaffected. Put simply, 22 wealthy men had taken it upon themselves to complicate the domestic schedules of hundreds of Patterson's families. Very arrogant thing to do, but if you're a worker, what can you do about it? What can you do about it? Hold that thought. For right now, I want to come back to that question that I asked you at the beginning of this installment. Does this remind you of anything? Does it remind you of something that we've read before? Does the name Harriet Martineau mean anything? Does that ring a bell a little bit? You had a quiz that had everything to do with Harriet Martineau's morals of the manufacturers. And if you recall, what's really got her all worked up is that these manufacturers are calling the shots not only while she's on the job, that's one thing, but even after work. After work, they're saying no lady that goes out dancing is going to have a job here the next morning. And the reason that they're saying that is because they say you can't be as productive. You can't do as good of work. You're not going to be as effective as you otherwise would be if you got a good night's sleep. It's one thing to tell people how they have to work and what they have to do when you're paying them to do so, and their private lives, that's a very different matter. I think this is a very similar situation. What they're doing, what these bosses, what these manufacturers are doing, is they're really messing around with people's private schedules. So, the reaction. What is the reaction? Let's find out. Flip over to page 68 or scroll down. Toward the bottom is the last paragraph on 68. The mills and factories closed at noon on Saturday. Workers left their machines and workbenches knowing that peace was at an end. There would be a day and a half of eerie quiet, and on Monday there would be trouble. Those people of Patterson began that day and a half with a walk to Passaic Falls. They streamed out of their workplaces and out of the houses and grog shops in the lower neighborhoods, jostling and talking. Latecomers hurried past the last empty factory and around the embankment, and there stood stood the crowd waiting for Sam Patch. A New Yorker estimated the crowd at 6 to 10,000, the whole town. At the appointed time, Sam strode out of the audience and he stepped onto his rock. At a part of the crowd stood at his back with the deserted town behind them. Clinton Bridge and the falls were at his right, and at the basin was at his feet. And everywhere Sam turned, he met the eyes of workmates and neighbors. He straightened, gathered himself, and stepped off and dropped with perfect grace into the gulf. Pay attention to this next part. Some person or persons had wanted to ensure that this grand gesture would be made. Sam collected $15 for the leap. Now, $15 doesn't seem like, lunch money to some of us. It's not a lot of money in these days. But in 1863, and for those of you that stay with me, you'll see what I'm talking about once we get there. In 1863, the Union Army is paying its infantrymen $13 per month. That is a month's salary, and we're talking about 1828, so it's even more than it would have been purchasing power wise in 1863. I guess my point is this is an enormous amount of money. And I don't know about you, but where I come from, what you spend your money on, that really says a lot about what you value. And so somebody really valued Sam doing this leap. I guess you might say that this is really when he enters into the ranks of a professional daredevil, but that's kind of a different story. It's an aside in so many different ways. They really wanted him to do the leap, and you gotta ask yourself why. Well, let me ask you this. If the president of the college said that he was going to jump off of a waterfall, would you go see that? I probably would show up. If somebody that you knew, like your boss, your employer, said that they were going to do some crazy stunt, would you show up for that? I probably would too. And so my point is, Sam's making this announcement not for no good reason. He wants people to show up, or whoever paid him the $15 wants him to show up. And the question becomes, why? What kind of power does a crazy person like Sam Patch have over all these people? Let's find out. I'm at the top or toward the top of page 69, and it's a paragraph that starts out with actually with the parenthesis. It starts out again, we cannot know, all right? Again, we cannot know what Sam wore for this leap, but it is likely that he jumped, as he did in future leaps, in the white shirt and pants that were the parade uniform of the Patterson Association of Spinners. This uniform carried meaning, probably for Patch, certainly for the Englishmen who worked with him and witnessed his leap that reached all the way back to Manchester. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, workers in the textile towns of Lancashire, led again by weavers and spinners, revived their demands for republican rights in the faces of Britain's victorious aristocrats. I don't know if you joined me in the last installment, if you remember me talking about jumping off of high places, and you better know what you're doing, otherwise that could have a pretty tragic outcome. What you wear matters greatly as far as your ability to maneuver in the water. And so, of all the things that he could have wore, why in the world did he use his uniform? Why wear his uniform? Well, go back to the book for a second. It carried meaning. It carried meaning to everybody that showed up. Who is he telling to show up? He's telling his fellow workers to show up. And so they see him standing on that rock right before he goes in, and what do they see? A uniform that everybody instantaneously knew what that meant. What it meant was we stood up to the rich guys, in this case Britain's aristocrats. We stood up to them one time before, and we can do it again and again and again if necessary. So what I want to do with the time that we have remaining is talk a little bit about the result of all of this. So flip the page, scroll down if you want to do that. It's two lines down from the top of page 70. Page 70. It's a paragraph that starts out, on Monday, the mill hands came to work. See that? On Monday, the mill hands came to work on time and worked at the machines through the morning. When the clock struck noon, they stopped. The spinners and weavers and the boys and girls who worked under them marched downstairs and out of doors. It was 12 o'clock. Time for lunch. The old lunch hour. They're not abiding by that new rule that got implemented by these 22 rich guys. Now, next paragraph. There are differing accounts as to what happened next. An early report stated that the workers had gone out on strike on Monday afternoon and had become very riotous and disorderly, and as such as to keep the inhabitants of the place in continual apprehension. The same report announced, erroneously, that the militia was on its way from Newark. Another account had young strikers, encouraged by the incorrigible weavers and spinners, mobbing their opponents and threatening to throw them into the ugly basin in which Mr. Patch jumps occasionally. The Patterson Intelligencer downplayed the violence, but admitted that the walkout was indeed conducted with some noise and show of outrage. The known facts are these. The workers rioted on Monday afternoon. 200 men and many more children and women were out on strike, and the only two mills that remained in operation, the two that had not tried to change the dinner hour. So let me go back to the jump. Why jump? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to think that he was trying to get everybody on the same page. Do you know how hard it is to get 200 people to do anything? I mean, in the 21st century, let alone back in the 19th century, we've got all kinds of technology that we can get people together relatively easily, or at least let them know what's about to take place. They don't have anything like that. But what they do have is Sam Patch, who absolutely commands an audience. People want to see him do these crazy stunts. And as such, he gathers everybody to one place. According to the book, the whole town was there. And basically, what he says right before he jumps is, "What's going on inside that factory? It's not right. It's not okay. I'm mad. You should be mad as well." And he jumps. What does he jump in? He jumps in his uniform. It reminds me so much about what we were reading about in Harriet Martineau, in that, it's one thing to tell me what you want me to do when you're paying me to do it, and it's another thing for you to tell me what I have to do in my own private time. In the case of Sam Patch, we all agreed that the lunch hour was going to be noon, and then midway through the game, you just arrogantly come in here and you decide to change all of it. Not okay. And so once again, you can see what's industrialization doing? It's giving an enormous amount of power to these people that own the means of production, that own the factories. What's the reaction? Well, the reaction in the case of Sam Patch is a massive walkout. 200 plus people walked off on strike, and it was really Sam that led them. Yes, it was, a jump off of a waterfall. It wasn't exactly an articulate speech or anything like that, but nonetheless, the objective was absolutely achieved. 200 people all rowing the boat in the same direction. So if you join me in this next installment, in installment number 3, we'll talk about the other vantage point, and of course, that's going to be, what does Sam Patch, what does a guy like Sam Patch mean to people that own the means of production? People that, are very well educated, people that have money, and people that look upon Sam Patch as maybe a little bit differently than how we've described him thus far in this series. You'll see what I mean in a minute.